Democrats have been adamant about pushing through nationwide mail-in voting. Nancy Pelosi wanted to get mail-in voting nationwide through with a coronavirus relief package. The argument is that because it's unsafe to go out due to the coronavirus, we should all vote by mail. But Republicans are concerned this will lead to widespread voter fraud. No one will be checking where the ballots are coming from, where they're going, and you'll just be hoping that the ballots are actually secure. There are concerns that people could easily slip in ballots, fraudulently fill out ballots, or someone could get the ballots for their kids or their parents, fill out them for the other family members, and basically commit voter fraud. Well, many people are arguing there's no such thing. There's no voter fraud. It's a myth. Put it to rest. And I've got several arguments to show you from people who claim that's the case. But we actually are seeing now some freaky goings on and some real instances that raise questions about whether or not we're really seeing voter fraud, notably in North Jersey, where people are claiming they didn't actually get their ballots yet. For some reason, it is being said they voted. In Maryland, they received absentee ballots from South Carolina. And in Nevada, there's ballots lying around and weird videos popping up. People are pointing their finger at these mail-in ballot inconsistencies, and they're very concerned about it. But while they say voter fraud is not widespread, it's not serious, we actually have a breaking story from South Philly. A judge of elections has actually admitted to taking bribes to stuff the ballot box for Democratic candidates. More than one. Now, some may argue it's a local election, doesn't matter. No, I tell you this. Local elections are the most important. Now, I think it's fair to say they're all equally important, but too often we disregard local elections and the seriousness of how these things impact our lives. And you got to understand that most of what we go through every day is at the local level. So we need to be paying attention because things like this are absolutely happening. Now, whether or not these stories translate to a greater trend of nationwide mail-in voting, I don't know. But I will tell you, if Republicans are concerned that there could be mail fraud through mail-in voting, and we actually have evidence in certain areas it does happen, perhaps then we should consider that mail-in voting is not secure. Maybe the Democrats want to make an argument for it. There has to be some very serious precautions taken and very serious security measures for mail-in ballots, but maybe it's just not possible. Let's take a look at these stories and break down whether or not we're dealing with a myth. There is no voter fraud, and we'll start by looking at an actual breaking story where a dude admitted to cheating for the Democrats. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is share this video. People are going to tell you voter fraud isn't real. Well, we've got this one instance, and this story is very, very serious. And they're going to tell me that I'm biased, and maybe I am, but this is the story that's popping up, okay? Maybe I missed some of these other big stories. This is the one I have. A judge was actually taking bribes to prop up Democrats. Let's read the story. From the Philadelphia Inquirer, they say a former judge of elections and Democratic committee person from South Philadelphia has pleaded guilty to accepting $2,500 in bribes to inflate the vote totals for 3 Democratic candidates for common pleas court judge in 2015, and also accepted money to add votes for other candidates, U.S. Attorney William M. McSwain announced Thursday. Dominic J. DeMuro, 73, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to deprive Philadelphia voters of their civil rights by fraudulently stuffing the ballot boxes for the judicial candidates and for other candidates seeking office in the 2014 and 2016 primary elections. And he admitted violating the Travel Act, which forbids the use of a cell phone to promote illegal activity, McSwain's office said. DeMuro, who could not be reached for comment, was paid between $300 and $5,000 for each election, the office said. Our election system relies on the honesty and the integrity of its election officials. If they are corrupt, the system is corrupt, which creates opportunities for election fraud and for the counting of fake votes, McSwain said in a video recorded statement sent to news outlets. DeMuro fraudulently stuffed the ballot box by literally standing in a voting booth and voting over and over as fast as he could, while he thought the coast was clear. This is utterly reprehensible conduct. The charges announced today do not erase what he did, but they do ensure that he is held to account for those actions, McSwain added. He did not name the candidate and did not say if they won their elections. Well, I think they absolutely should. I mean, these elections have to be void now, right? You mean to tell me there could be people in public office who didn't actually get elected? I think it's pretty important they reveal who these individuals were. and whether or not the election was swung by this judge stuffing the ballot in exchange for bribes from political consultants. It really is that easy, isn't it? When the media tells you fraud doesn't exist, I'd imagine that would raise some eyebrows, and you have to question why they would say this. Voter fraud does exist. It's why we have security at all. Why would you want to relax security? We're better safe than sorry, right? I mean, look, we locked down across the country over an abundance of precaution. And you know what? Many of these nationwide field hospitals weren't used. So maybe we did the right thing being overly cautious, even though we didn't need it. Perhaps it's important to have election security, especially if you're dealing with years and years of them claiming that Russia was interfering with our elections. Now, I'm not saying what I think that security should be, but certainly we can all accept this is a problem, right? Politics aside. DeMuro admitted that a political consultant whose name prosecutors did not reveal paid him to add votes for Democratic candidates running for the bench and other federal, state, and local offices, prosecutors said. We're not even talking about local office at this point. Now we're talking about federal elections. Is this guy going to face federal law enforcement? And who is this consultant who paid for it? Shouldn't they also be getting arrested, charged, or indicted? The consultant, who is a former elected official, took fees from the candidates and used part of the money to pay DeMuro, a judge of elections in the 36th Division of the 39th Ward, they said. Sounds to me like these candidates were actually involved, paying fees to a guy who then used that money to bribe a judge to stuff the ballots. In May 2014, DeMuro inflated vote totals by adding 27 fraudulent ballots in the primary election, 40 votes in May 2015 and 46 in 2016, according to court documents outlining the scheme and the charges against him. While those numbers may seem small, prosecutors said, they made up a significant percentage of the total votes cast at the polling place. In 2014, 118 total ballots were reported there, which means that DeMuro's fraudulent votes accounted for over 22% of the total voting in that division in 2014. In 2015, his fraud accounted for over 15% of the votes cast in the division. In 2016, it accounted for 17%. Al Schmidt, vice chairman of the Office of Philadelphia City Commissioners, which runs elections, said his office found that DeMuro's 36th division had a history of more votes being cast on machines than the number of voters who signed poll books. His and his office referred the division's troubling vote numbers from 2014 and 15 to the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. It was pretty flagrant, and it was repeated again and again. It was a source of frustration for me because it kept occurring again and again. Of the city's 1,703 voting divisions, Schmidt said the commissioner's office flagged voting irregularities in about 6 divisions in each election and refers them to law enforcement. We take election integrity seriously. That's why we've been referring these cases since I first came into office in 2012. DeMuro, who pleaded guilty in March in a sealed proceeding before U.S. District Judge Paul S. Diamond, faces up to 15 years in federal prison when sentenced June 30th. So this does sound like these are federal charges. His lawyer, Janine Vinci, declined to comment Thursday. In a statement, FBI Special Agent Michael J. Driscoll denounced DeMuro's actions. Dominic DeMuro put a thumb on the scale for certain candidates in exchange for bribes. As public trust in the electoral process is vital, the FBI's message today is clear. Election interference of any kind by hostile foreign actors or dishonest local officials won't be tolerated. The investigation is ongoing, and those with information on election fraud are asked to contact the FBI. Now, this is scary. This guy was swinging the vote for federal elections. Now, you got to understand, we have found evidence of one person doing one thing in a small election with about 1,700 votes. In some votes, only 118 votes cast. He was absolutely putting weight on the scales, which says to me it may have actually swung the vote. However, what you got to realize is that there are a bunch of different districts. The districts all vote, and then that trickles up. Think about how that would work in a federal election. You would need guys like him, people like him, in many different districts to swing an election. But there are key places where this is possible. You might find a county with only a few hundred people. You only need a couple dozen fake votes, and that county turns a certain color, and then that provides, delegates or whatever, depending on the kind of primary they're doing, the kind of election they're doing, be it a primary or federal election. Regardless of how severe or how much this actually swayed the elections, we got to take this stuff seriously. And it looks like the FBI does. Now, recently, Donald Trump, here's what the New York Times reported, Donald Trump steps up attacks on mail voting, making false claims about fraud. President Trump initially said he might withhold federal funding for Michigan and Nevada if the states move forward in expanding vote by mail, though he later backed off the threat. Trump is taking this very, very seriously. But there's something interesting I want to talk about before I show you actual questionable instances. One of the concerns I see for Republicans is that mail-in voting is likely to increase youth turnout, in my opinion. Actually, that was my opinion until it was proven false, at least so far. What I was thinking was, while voter fraud is a very serious issue we need to pay attention to, one of the things that will negatively impact Republicans is that vote by mail will increase the amount of apathetic voters. So you've got young people who don't care to vote. They get a ballot in the mail and they say, sure, fine, whatever. They fill it out and just put it back in the mailbox. This is a huge advantage for Democrats, which is why it makes sense, in my opinion, they would want to change the rules. Right now, you have people who want to vote voting. People who don't want to vote don't vote. How do you get people who don't want to vote to vote? Put the ballot right in their face. But then we saw California's 25th district, and it was mostly mail-in vote, and the Republicans absolutely crushed. Turns out young people still don't vote, even if you give them the ballot, which is kind of hilarious. Which leaves us now with the more serious question. Well, I was absolutely wrong on this. The question now comes up of voter fraud, and we actually have what appears to be mail-in voter fraud popping up. The next thing I want to show you, NorthJersey.com. New Jersey primary election will be held mostly by mail, Governor Murphy says. May 15th, 2020. New Jersey will conduct its July presidential primary election using primary mail-in ballots, Governor Phil Murphy announced Friday. The South Jersey area is part of the Philadelphia metro where this judge lived. So you've got problems here, man. If they're going to do a primary, I mean, I'm not sure if it really matters they're doing a Democratic primary because Joe Biden is supposed to be the nominee. But we'll see what happens at the convention if they actually choose Joe Biden. There's still the potential that the vote can be swung, and there's a potential of corruption in the Philadelphia area, which does include parts of South Jersey. I have to wonder then if this is the right move. Well, now we can see evidence that it may in fact be the wrong move. Corruption allegations keep growing in Patterson vote by mail election. This story is actually predates the statement by the governor, which I find interesting. There are actual concerns about voter fraud, and the governor just says, yeah, we're going to go with it anyway. Check out this story from NBC4 New York. One woman said there are 8 relatives and immediate neighbors she knows of listed as having voted, but who insist they never even received ballots, including one relative who says she has been in Florida for weeks. Numerous residents are now complaining that they never received or sent in vote by mail ballots, even though Passaic County Board of Elections records show a ballot in their name was mailed in. Ramona Javier made the exact complaint from her front stoop along Chestnut Street. We did not receive vote by mail ballots, and thus we did not vote, she said in Spanish. When she was shown an official list of some of the people who voted on her block, and that her name was on that list, Javier said, this is corruption, this is fraud. Let me stop you right there, everybody. Let me stop you right there. What was that, Chris Wallace? The Hill reports Chris Wallace debunks Trump. No record of massive or serious voter fraud from mail-in voting. Interesting. Well, I'd like you to talk to this woman, Ramona Javier, and ask her if she has seen evidence of voter fraud with vote by mail. Looks like it is. Now you can argue Chris Wallace said no serious or, widespread, but that still doesn't take into account you're minimizing complaints of fraud, and you're getting very specific when you don't need to. If someone says there's a threat of voter fraud with mail-in ballots, well, then we look into it. And if someone lost their vote, someone didn't get to vote, I think that person has a right to challenge this, and that means there is fraud and it matters. If one vote is stolen, that's the rights of one person, their right to vote. You take that away from them. We can't stand for that. Take a look at this story. Javier said that there are 8 relatives and immediate neighbors she knows of listed as having voted, but who insist they never even received ballots, including one relative who she says has been in Florida for weeks. The local councilman, Louis Velez, said he knows of a dozen additional cases just like these across his ward. Where is the democracy in this? Where is the fair process? This is North Jersey. I mean, this is mostly a blue area. This is Democrat. Questions of corruption continue to grow about the vote by mail elections across Patterson, New Jersey's 3rd largest city. Videos are surfacing online of a single voter carrying numerous ballots. Postal workers were seen leaving some ballots sitting out in building lobbies. And hundreds of filled out ballots were found by postal workers in single mailboxes in Patterson, suggesting a possible vote bundling operation, which election experts say is a crime. In one case, officials said more than 300 Patterson city ballots were found in a single mailbox in an entirely different town, Haledon. That's gotta raise some questions about voter fraud, right? This is the problem with mail-in voting. It's not what, look, we can stop before we get to accusations of crimes and just say we can't prove it. So I'll tell you the Democrats, to the Democrats who are arguing for mail-in voting, let me just tell you, you realize that Republicans can raise red flags and undermine the legitimacy of the vote if it is legit, right? Think about it this way. Let's say all these votes are real and they're all done properly. Well, now people are noticing that too many ballots showed up in one place, and that gives Republicans the opportunity to challenge it. You wouldn't want that, would you? Well, then we shouldn't give them the opportunity. Now, Republicans, you can easily see there's potential for fraud here because all of these votes are popping up in one place in a different town. It shouldn't make sense. I think there's a good reason for both sides to say this presents serious problems. Now, they argue Donald Trump voted absentee, and therefore vote by mail must be safe, even though, but Donald Trump's a hypocrite, they say. I'm sorry, listen. Special circumstances for absentee ballots, I think, is fine. It makes sense. But we still do have a problem with voter fraud. Just because Trump voted with it doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe we need much more serious security. The problem arises with widespread mail-in voting when everyone is doing it. Then you can't track where the ballots are coming or going from. If a mail person is just going to come and pick them up and grab one ballot at a time, it's very easy for one corrupt individual to offer a stack of cash to some low-level postal worker, and they say, just put this in your truck. Not only that, someone could just walk in and drop them off at a post office and say, here are the ballots, and they won't even know where they came from. Let's read a little bit more. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy did not address the specific problems boiling for days in Patterson during his coronavirus news briefing Wednesday. But when asked about possible corruption issues with the vote-by-mail elections across the state, Murphy said, it is too early to give you a full answer. Yet 2 days later, he said, New Jersey primary election will be held by mail. Even though you are getting questions about the fraud in your state, people are upset. They're calling it outright corruption. Feel bad. These big wigs, this governor, he's not going to do anything for you. And that's why I'm upset living here. But don't worry, Murphy. Don't worry. I'm going to leave. OK, I won't get in your way. I won't get in your hair. I'm just going to leave and you can have your state and do what you want. I do feel bad. Maybe I should. Maybe I should stay. Then I can actually vote and vote people like this out. I don't want to deal with it. I'm sorry. This state has too many problems. For those that aren't familiar, I live in the South Jersey area. Election officials have set aside more than 800 ballots so far amid corruption concerns in Patterson. One candidate, Ramon Joaquin, said the Board of Elections was not being transparent about how officials were deciding to eliminate votes. The 800 votes should be counted, or the names of the people whose votes were suppressed should be released. And there is another point for why Democrats should be opposing this. Think about what happens if you have a Republican district. This should be a bipartisan effort. We can't allow this. We need election security. You get some guy with Republican sympathies and he can say, we're going to remove this ballot because it's questionable. And there you go. Now the vote can swing in the other direction. Now, I'm just playing devil's advocate. The reality is a Democrat or Republican could both be doing this. That judge happened to have been favoring Democrats, but who knows? Seems like he just wanted the money. Someone could have paid him off and he could have just flipped it for the Republicans, I guess. But we can't have elections by the highest bidder. Now, what's happening here? Well, let me read a little bit more, actually. This is important. Patterson Mayor Andre Saya has voiced concern ballot stealing operations may have been underway in some wards, and he said so-called ballot stuffing appeared to be a big problem. The mayor called on law enforcement authorities to investigate. Also calling for a criminal investigation was council candidate Frank Filippelli. He said he was also aware of voting problems he believed were criminal across the city. State Attorney General Gurbir Grewal has declined repeated requests from WNBC for an interview to answer questions about voting problems in Patterson or to explain what his office is doing about the complaints. In a press conference last year at Patterson City Hall, Grewal acknowledged his office was off to a slow start in investigating various corruption allegations across the state. So I'm done with this place, man. I don't want to live here. There should be no reason that it should be no reason this isn't a bipartisan effort. Now take a look at these other stories. South Carolina, absentee ballots found in Baltimore. Elections official blame printer. Excuse me? How do you accidentally send South Carolina absentee ballots to Baltimore? That doesn't seem right. That seems very strange. It seems like even if this was just a big old accident, we've got a serious case of insecurity. How can we spend 4 or 5 years complaining about interference from foreign governments and then not take this more seriously and secure our elections? I'm sorry, Democrats, you've got no real argument when it comes to voter ID. You really, really don't. If I got to use my ID to go to the movies, and I do, surprisingly, even though I'm 34, they've asked for my IDs. Usually when I clean shave, which I don't really do all that often. If I need an ID to buy booze, come on, you got to have an ID to vote, right? I walk into my polling location and I say, here's my name. You got to prove who you are. There's also the issue of voter roll purges. Democrats argue that Republicans are trying to remove people from the voter rolls so that they can stop them from voting. That's a really good complaint. And perhaps it's true. But there's another problem. People who aren't living in these states anymore having casted ballots. You can take a look at what happens in Patterson. If these people are saying their votes were cast and they weren't the ones who did it, what happens if someone moves, like this woman who said she was in Florida, and then someone votes using her name? If I move to a different state and someone in a certain area votes for me using my information, that's how they get away with stuffing the ballots, because I'm not going to be there to complain about it. We do have another story in Nevada. Nevada's vote by mail primary stirs fraud concerns as unclaimed ballots pile up. Something stinks here. I'm sorry, man. Democrats, you really don't have an argument for this. And I don't understand, because all arguments point to why Democrats should be in favor of securing these mail-in ballots, especially when they led the charge against the voter interference. We got to secure our ballots, man. There's one other big issue that comes up in all of this, and it's ballot harvesting. People often bring this up when I mention, the Republicans won in California's 25th, showing that, whether it's mail-in or in person doesn't really matter, but there is fraud concerns. And a lot of people have brought up ballot harvesting. So let's do this. I'm going to show you this article from Fox News so you can get a better understanding of what ballot harvesting is. I know a lot of people don't like Fox News. Well, I don't have to tell you. They're the ones who are actually bringing up what it does. Consider what I've shown you already with 3 different instances of potential mail-in voter fraud, and then one story in South Philly of overt federal, state, local, primary voter fraud outright. A guy taking bribes to do this. I don't know what the answer is to securing our elections better. I don't. I do know that I think we need to. So what is the argument from Democrats? You want mail-in voting? Okay, then we need to have very, very serious and secure pickup locations. It cannot be through the post office. Let's be honest. We would need something like a local independent board of a large group of people to go around collecting the ballots at the same time on camera, and then putting them all in a bin, and the camera's live on them the entire time. I mean, maybe we should just live stream ballot collection, period. Let's take a look real quick. I'll wrap up by showing you what ballot harvesting is and why this is considered to be somewhat nefarious, depending on who you ask. Fox says, ballot harvesting, or the practice of allowing political operatives and others to collect voters' ballots and turn them in en masse to polling stations, has drawn bipartisan concerns of fraud from election watchers. Several states have enacted some restrictions on the practice, while others have expressly allowed it or failed to regulate it at all. According to a 2019 analysis by Ballotpedia, 24 states and the District of Columbia permit someone chosen by the voter to return mailed ballots on their own, with 9 of those states adding some specific exceptions. 12 states outline who specifically can return ballots, i.e. family members or caregivers, and 1 state explicitly requires only voters can return their ballots. 11 states establish a limit on the number of ballots that a so-called harvester can return. Imposing restrictions on the practice has led to legal challenges. In Arizona, a federal appeals court upheld a ballot harvesting prohibition, despite a claim that it unfairly discriminated against minorities who might need help filling out their ballots. I'm going to stop you right there. The go-to seems to be voter ID. It's racist. Ballot harvesting. It's, blocking ballot harvesting is racist. I'm sorry, man. If someone doesn't have the knowledge or the ability to do so, then they shouldn't do so. That's just it. If you can't prove who you are, then you can't vote. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to vote, but I'm confident most people have the ability to get an ID. I mean, how do you get a job otherwise? We then also have, when it comes to ballot harvesting, arguing that a minority might not be smart enough. I'm sorry, that's overtly racist. We can't make assumptions about minorities' abilities or intelligence to fill this stuff out. If they want to vote, they can show up and then they can vote. We face real challenges, right? But you're not gonna convince me, a moderate, independent type voter, who to vote for by telling me that minorities aren't smart enough to do it. It doesn't work that way. You can argue safety, that's fine, but I'll tell you what, when I go to Walmart, when I go to these big box stores, Costco or whatever, and everybody's just going about their business, you're not going to convince me that people can't just go vote. I understand voting is more people, and so there's closer proximity, and this will take a longer amount of time. But I don't think having insecure ballots or elections makes sense at all. This tends to be the argument from the left, and I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And I'm someone who's been begging for a Democrat to vote for, but if the only thing they can offer up is changing the rules, then you don't deserve to win. Maybe that's me, maybe I'm biased, but I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think. I think I've shown you plenty of examples of mail-in voter fraud, which should raise some concerns for everyone. I mean, ballot harvesting seems to raise concerns for everybody too. Republicans and Democrats can both do it. Let me know what you think about that Philly judge. That's a real example of a Democrat getting caught stuffing the ballot in several elections. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews. It is a different channel, and I will see you all then.